Back to branding class. I'm Ryan Hamrick. If you were with us last week, we talked a little bit about the kind of overarching idea of what we're doing here. I'm working at a big school district now here in Texas, and a big part of my job there is to, just rebrand a lot of different entities, a bunch of different schools. We have almost 50 in our district. And there are just many, many other things that come along with a role like that include, things from marketing materials and flyers and stuff, but also things like something I've been working on for the last couple months, actually, which was the graduation ceremony programs for all of our 6 high schools that just had their graduations on Friday and Saturday. And a big part of my job also, as part of ostensibly the communications team, is to go and cover those graduation ceremonies as well. So that was what I was doing from about 8 a.m. to after 8 p.m. Both Friday and Saturday this weekend, was being with my team and shooting photos. And one of our other team is a video guy. He was doing video and all that. So that was a ton of fun. I was able to just kind of take the cameras and go wild and take thousands and thousands of photos, and then just kind of hand off the the memory cards to my boss, who was in charge of taking those and filtering them and making, the pics and everything, which is great because that is something I can lose an awful lot of time to, if it is up to me to to run those things. So so come on into the chat and let us know that you're here. I would love to try and answer some questions for everybody while we're streaming today. If you were here last week, then you know that one of the main things that I want to do today is to actually redraw in vector a piece of lettering that I did for those graduation programs, that I didn't actually end up having time to vector before it needed to get going. So I want to do that, and I figured what better way to do that than to do it live. The graduation's already over, so I don't need to do it. So this is a great opportunity to kind of save something for you guys. I'm going to try something here. I've got another camera setup that I think should work here. Let's see if I fade here. Hey, what do you know? So got a little overhead camera here because I wanted to show some of the programs here. I've got a video made for posting to Instagram later today that kind of shows the time lapse of the lettering creation and kind of like some of the in action versions of these. But like I said, we've got 6 high schools, plus an alternative school actually, which is in here somewhere. One of these guys. Actually, no, I don't have that one here. These are just the six core kind of comprehensive schools. So you can see that they all are of a piece, right? We've got very different branding across the different high schools and different colors, of course. You got to have your class pride. But yeah, so like we've got some schools that have a great, sort of coat of arms style seal branding. Same with Leander here. Got some lions at the top. They're the Leander Lions. Whereas this school, Vista Ridge, kind of primarily uses this VR monogram. And so I use that on their program instead. Cedar Park is the Timberwolves. Vandegrift is the Vipers, and so on. So we've got all these. They were kind of getting to a point where they were kind of all over the place in recent years, and there was nobody in my kind of position at the district level doing any kind of template creation for them, or sort of any unifying of the design of these. So we kind of wanted to get back to that this year. And so we've got, for instance, the compass rose from the Leander ISD branding on there, but just in a white on colored background that matches the color of the school's colors, so it doesn't really clash with theirs. Our colors are blue and yellow, right? So that's not going to work with a lot of these schools' colors. So I've got some branding that is a great monotone version for use in these kind of scenarios, and fits pretty well. And then you've just got a plain set in Futura version of the spelled out name of the district there. Pretty unobtrusive, pretty subtle, right? But then otherwise, you've got all these different elements that are shared among them and just kind of set in school colors. So we've got this this pattern that I made, really inspired by the sort of Japanese patterns that are typically based on like a kind of a 6-pointed star, if you will. But since our logo is this 8-pointed compass rose, I actually created a different version that is 8-pointed. So it's kind of like a compass rose, I don't know, the Japanese compass rose pattern that I made for these. And that kind of carries on throughout the programs. But yeah, inside you've got that class of 2025 lettering that I did as well. And again, kind of like some of that district level unity and everything. But then also we've got that pattern going across the top still, which I think works really well as a header. But then here is the lettering that we're going to be recreating today. I did the iPad sketch of this and turned out to be cleaned up enough to use for the programs. And I brought it in and kind of put it in there as a placeholder until I could recreate it in vector. And then kind of as I went along, I just decided at some point that it didn't need to be recreated, and that it was like, I had it in high res enough version for just printing. Okay. So we went with that. But myself, I know that it was not created in vector. So that was a problem for me. So let's go back here. Now what I'm going to do, I've got Illustrator opened up, and so we're going to jump over to there, and I've already got this sketch brought into there, and we're going to go ahead and get started on vectoring that. I don't know. I always go back and forth on whether it should be called vectoring as a verb, or, I know a lot of people say vectorizing. I don't know. What do you guys think? Tell me in the comments what you call it, and if you think that, like me, vectorizing or vectoring something is not actually a word, or it feels weird and wrong when you say it. I always tend to default to saying redrawing in vector. I don't know. It's a mouthful and it's weird. What do you guys think? You let me know. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm gonna get Illustrator going here, or switch over to it rather. Let's come over here. Woo. All right. So we've got our piece of lettering in here. And again, this is just the iPad sketch, but I managed to clean it up pretty decently before bringing it into the computer. So we've got it in here. And what I like to do when I am creating any kind of especially script, especially kind of like a high contrast script that is very, very fine in the thin parts, right? Or like a hairline kind of aspect to it, you might say. I always like to bring these in. I'll drop the opacity down. In this case, I've got it down to 30 here. And let me actually drag this guy in a smidge here so you can be sure to see all my tools. Where's my edge there? There we go. All right, cool. but yeah, so I've got this in here. I've got it on a new layer here. Once I've got the opacity down, then I'll lock that, right? And then it's usually pretty good. I think it's generally a good practice when doing lettering to, kind of create some guides for yourself. Now, at a time, I definitely would go so far as to create not only like baseline X height guides, but also some diagonal slant guides, which I've kind of gotten away from doing because I feel like that is a bit too constraining for me, and sort of forces me into using them and making things align to it that may otherwise be better as a little bit more free flowing, and just kind of using those guides as a frame of reference rather than a strict thing that I'm trying to align everything to, if that makes sense. So let me pop out this chat so I can get it more in my view here. The thinking behind the pattern, stay balanced, was, yeah, I did explain that. It was basically just kind of borrowed from some really cool Japanese patterns that you see on like traditional kimono fabrics and stuff, but they're usually based on they're centered around like a six-sided, like hexagonal slash six-pointed star kind of pattern. But with our branding being the compass rose and it being eight points, I kind of created my own version for that purpose. And yeah, I just kind of using it as a nice pattern to kind of be an accent piece. So yeah. Despicable Me vector. Oh my gosh. So yes, we've got numerous references to that. I have kids that are a little bit older now, but they were definitely coming up in the time of Despicable Me, and we loved those movies, and particularly really enjoyed the Vector character. I still to this day will often say freeze ray or something to that effect, or especially I will say, what's the other thing that we always reference? Like, oh yeah, squid launcher. Oh yeah. And a lot of things that come out there, you say the words, oh yeah, maybe more often, and I'll often say it in Vector's voice for sure. And we have a cat named Vector, which he may make an appearance at some point, possibly too, but less so about Despicable Me, more about just Vector artwork. One of our other cats is Bezier, fun fact. So back to Illustrator, we've got this guy here. So let's create those guides. I'm going to go ahead and show my rulers here, and I'll just drag one down, put it at about there. And you always want to, with any lettering like this, you guys may be familiar if you're type nerds or whatever with the concept of round shapes kind of overshooting your X heights, your cap heights, your baselines, and things like that, where flat terminals and just more straight shapes are going to actually meet that guideline. And so we're gonna use that approach here, that line of thinking. And so, like for instance, this N is actually the only non-round shape on this whole word at the bottom. So we'll go ahead and align that guide with that bottom of that N there. And then we'll grab another one and we'll do the same thing kind of with this A, but then it also kind of, because I drew this with guidelines on the iPad, these guys already are lined up. So that's good to see. Same with this other A. Great. So now what I want to do, instead of just dragging down guides to the other word as well and lining them up with these guys here, let's see. Oh, I do have one straight shape on the bottom here, this N, and then several across the top there. But instead of just dragging those down to those areas of that sketch, what I'll do is actually grab these top ones and kind of duplicate them. So let's see, I don't have guides unlocked. I'll do Command Option : which will unlock those. Now I can select them. It's a good tip. I always say in every workshop that I'm ever teaching or anything like that, get to know your shortcuts. It will make you so much faster at everything you're doing. Okay, so now I've got both of those selected. We can tell because they are blue in my case, because my layer's blue. So I will hold my Option key, and then actually I'm going to grab from the top one so I can see it better. And I will drag that down. Sometimes my guides don't come together. Darn it. Let's try that again. There we go. Sometimes I start holding my Shift key a little too early to constrain the direction that I'm dragging something when I'm trying to duplicate ostensibly, and I will press the Shift key a little too soon and deselect the thing that I clicked on instead of, you probably can relate with that. Let's see. All right, so now as we can see, again, because I drew this on the iPad with guides that I basically duplicated in this same way, my sketch already lines up with exactly the spacing that I had between these two guides when I duplicated them. So in order to keep these guides from being accidentally selected or moved in any way, whatever, I'm going to go ahead and lock those again. So I'm going to again do Command Option semicolon, and now I can't select those. So I can't select them by dragging. I can't move them. None of that. Great. That's what I want. Locked, visible, but and able to snap to, but not able to move. Okay. So now I've got these guys in here. Let's zoom back out a little bit so we can see that. Great. All right. Now we're ready to do some lettering. So what I'll do sometimes is I'll kind of keep that sketch and those guides on a different layer and create a new one on top to do my lettering on. Also particularly like having, this is totally just a personal preference, but I feel like it is one of the more easily visible colors for, using as a contrast to just like a simple black stroke or something like that when you're kind of laying down the initial vectors for a piece of lettering like this, to have the layer that you're doing it on in red. I don't know, personal preference. You could do like bright green or something, whatever the third one is, and maybe that's the kind of contrast you want, but red seems to be, to me, a good contrast against the white background, but also the black that you're using for your stroke or whatever while you're building this. So shortcuts on my mouse, better touch tool always jumping in the way. Okay, so now I've got layer 2 there. And within layer 1, by the way, I do have my sketch locked as well. I think I mentioned that, but it's always good for that not to be accidentally moving from underneath you as you're trying to build this thing and have it be nicely structured and balanced and everything. So we'll make sure that we're on layer 2 though, and I'm going to make sure that I have the direct selection tool selected first. Every time I'm using the pen tool, I always make sure that I've got direct selection tool used last, so that whenever I use my keyboard shortcuts, it's direct selection tool that I'm using when I press like command and try and do, a modification tool, right? This is another thing that I always show people, and I swear I'm going to get into the drawing of the vector here in just a second, but this is very important for the way that I draw with the pen tool and specifically draw letters. In Illustrator, in settings, let's go to settings and we'll go to, which one is it in? Selection and anchor display. Okay. There is a default setting that is not the best setting for drawing, at least in my approach to drawing lettering. It's not the best for it, and it needs to be changed. This guy right here in selection and anchor display, constrain path dragging on segment reshape. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. That's the default, is for it to be off. And I'm going to show you a quick example of what that looks like. So if I'm drawing this C, for instance, right? If I go ahead and do this here, and then I go with the second thing, and I kind of like lock it at a perfect horizontal there. Let me go ahead and make my stroke black here. Let's just do that. All right. Now, the way that I like to work is after I've got a thing here, I got my points placed where I want and at the angles that I want, I like to hold Command to activate my direct selection tool, and I like to drag this path there. Now, we see that when I've done that, it turned my handles and their orientation, which then kind of like created this bow in my, let me zoom in a little bit here, kind of bowed out this curve at both of those ends, right? And that is not what I want. I set those angles of those Bezier handles to be exactly what I wanted, directly horizontal at that top one, and at the angle that I know is the one that I need for that endpoint. But when I when I dragged that segment, it did not constrain those handles. So that's what I need to be able to work the way that I want to work. And I'll show you the way that it does work when you have it changed. And let's see here. Let's go to settings, go back to selection and anchor display. So I will now check that box, constrain path dragging on segment reshape. And since that's the default, you may not have ever realized that this is such a fundamentally different way of using the pen tool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to undo. And now we're back to this. I've got this guy set at the angle that I set him at. These handles up here are perfectly horizontal, right? Now, if I hold Command and I drag this segment, I can put it into place, and those handles do not change their angle, and they're constrained when I reshape this segment. So that comes in very, very handy as I'm drawing this. So good tip to use when you're doing any pen tooling. In my opinion, it just works so much better because you can set your points and then come back to change those segments. But especially for lettering like this, where you want consistency in your slants and your I don't know, the way that you're angling your points at the different points of extrema and all that, it's super, super helpful to have it this way and to work this way. So I encourage you to try it if you haven't and didn't know about it before, and kind of follow along and watch as I'm doing this to see how that works in practice. So, okay, I've got it set back the way that I want to. And now I'm just going to keep on drawing this C. So I've got that point there. I should still be connected to it. Yep. Okay. I put that a little lower than I'd like. So I'm going to hold my space bar and move that up a little bit. And again, I'm going to hold Command and drag that segment into place. Boom. And get the next one. That's pretty good. I can drag that here. And sometimes I'll go through and like maybe do a whole letter or something with, kind of just plotting the points, and then come back and move all those segments to the place that I want them. Sometimes I'll do them as I go. I don't know. I just do it both ways sometimes, whatever the mood strikes me as the way to do it at that time. So sometimes I'll just do this. I'll come in here, grab this one, come down here, bam, bam. And then I'll kind of do this one here because when I'm going through here and I'm plotting these points, I generally like to put them sort of like right in the middle of where that stroke is. Just kind of where that core skeleton stroke would live. But in a place like this stroke that's coming up here is not actually a part of that A, right? It's a part of the C. So the A will have its own stroke that will come through the middle of the weight of that part of the A. This guy is going to be thin at this point and kind of just meet the edge of that A right there. So that's why I'm not placing that point like in the middle of this here, because we want it to line up with kind of that outside edge of it instead when we get to that point. So now that I'm done drawing the points of that C, I can come back in here and hold Command and drag these segments on into place. Boom, boom, and boom, and the last guy. Sweet. All right. Now we got a C going, all right? So for now, I'm just going to leave that at this unified, monolinear 1-point stroke for now. We'll get to adding the weight later on. Okay, so let me go ahead and keep on with this next letter here. If you guys have any questions about any of the ways that I'm doing this and using the pen tool and anything like that, you just holler out and let me know. Let's see here. Okay, so we'll go into our A here. And I like to, for these round shapes like this, I like to sort of treat them like they are just regular ellipses, right? So like if you drew an ellipse, you wouldn't draw a point here, a point here, a point here, and a point like at the furthest right point here, right? If you had an ellipse that was drawn and then you rotated it this way, for instance, your points would actually be at the top, the bottom, and then the sides, right? So I like to sort of think about these kinds of shapes in that way because that is kind of like the most efficient, best way to draw an ellipse. So I kind of treat it that way instead of like putting them at the exact points of extrema or the very top, bottom, left, and right most points that you would normally, that's the approach you would normally take for most other vector shapes. So I'll kind of start there and then I'll grab a spot right here at the side, one at the bottom. And again, I'm just kind of like eyeballing this angle here because it's more, with lettering like this, it's kind of more about the feel of it than the precision of it at this point, especially with like, if you're not designing like a typeface or something where everything is, ideally very precise and will ultimately be just meticulously programmed to work well with all the other letters and everything. With a specific lettering piece like this, it's a lot more about feel and what looks right and that kind of thing. So I don't stress as much about the exact angles that I'm doing everything. Okay. I feel like that's pretty good there. Now, I've got a bunch of those round shapes. So I'm going to save myself some time and I'm going to duplicate those suckers and put them all across there. So I just used the A keyboard shortcut to switch directly to my direct selection tool. And I'm going to just copy these guys. So there's my D. There's my next D. And I actually shifted that a little bit. Let's go there. Okay. My next A. And then I'll drag one down for this A. Okay. My D. As I'm dragging these, I'm holding Option or Alt, whatever, to drag those. I'm on a Mac, by the way, if that wasn't clear. And let me go over a little bit more. But then I'm also, once I start dragging it, I am holding the Shift key to keep them locked, moving just horizontally so they don't shift up and down at all and get off my baseline and everything. And then I'll do one more for my O. Cool. So now I got those in there. And I'll come back up here and continue with this A. Oh, let me switch back to my pen tool using the P key. And I'll just kind of come through here. Again, I'm just kind of following the direct sort of like skeleton center lines of these strokes. Yeah, I don't like the way that worked. Let's see. Let me change that angle a little bit. Yeah, sometimes it pays to skip a point, and sometimes it doesn't. So I'll go ahead and put one in there. Let's go ahead and lock him vertically. Move him down here. And then because of my constrained path dragging, I can sort of fudge with this guy a little bit. I'll put him out a little bit more here. These little tight turns are sometimes some of the trickier spots. Okay, let me fix that angle a little bit again. Okay, that's better. Okay, So now I'll keep going here. I think I broke my stroke, so I'll just kind of drag to start from there again. With these guys, these sort of like S curves here, I'll often just kind of like do one at the bottom, one at the top at the points of extrema, and just kind of lock them out horizontally, and then only add things to them as far as additional points go if needed. So I'll pull that guy out there, pull him out here. Okay. There we go. I feel like this guy needs to come over and down a little bit more yet to be actually correct. Okay, I feel like that's better for sure. All right. Okay. So I'll come back up here. And again, I'll kind of, I didn't like where it left me without that little side point on that A. So I'm going to go ahead and add one there for this guy. Okay. This guy needs to go up a little bit. So this is another, I mean, the constraining the angles of those handles when you're dragging these segments makes it super easy to make edits when you need to too, because then you can just kind of move your points around and then drag those segments until they start behaving the way that you're expecting them to. Okay, I like that pretty well. All right, so now here's another one of those examples, like the way the stroke of this C meets the A, where I've kind of got a similar situation going on here with this N, where this stroke comes down and he's nice and heavy on this downstroke, but then this upstroke is kind of a separate stroke, right? I don't want to really connect these here, so I'm just gonna do a command click usually instead of escaping or anything like that to break those strokes. It's just faster in the workflow. So I'll just kind of start a new stroke here-ish and bring them up here. Sometimes with these kind of turns, I'll treat them like one of those ellipses, and I'll try and see if I can put an angled point kind of at the peak of that turnaround there. And sometimes that can be a better approach. And so I'll do the same thing down here and treat this like one of those S curves like before, but just on the angle here. So I'll drag this one out and then this one back like that. Okay, it's working out pretty well. Like that. And then I've got my D, my little round ellipse for my D there. So I'll come up against him, sort of align that sort of at a tangent, but again off center, so that once I've got my weights in there, it's better lined up. Okay, I feel like I need to fudge with this a little bit. It probably needs to move that way a smidge, so I can give it a little bit more length on this handle, a little less length on this handle, to get closer to that round shape. Yeah, I like that. All right, cool. So there's my N. All right, get this D going. Now, I always have trouble deciding where to start when I have like a big, really swashed character like this guy here, but you know, it works to kind of just start in the middle if you want to. You can always like break your stroke and then come back and kind of continue it. But in this case, this guy, oops, he starts all the way up here after the swash. So let's go ahead and just start there. We can talk about some things that I do when I'm vectoring a big flourish like this. So I kind of just like start in that angle that I know I'm gonna need there. Kind of come to this point of extrema there. Drag my guy into place. And then that kind of shows me that this angle is actually a little bit too intense, and I'll kind of fix that a little bit. All right, So then I'll grab my next guy here. Boom. Fix him. With some of these bigger round shapes like this, I find that it's helpful to kind of move those segments into place as I go, just to kind of keep a better grasp of how it's shaping up and kind of spot problem areas before I'm too far past them, instead of just going and plotting all the points and coming back through to move the segments. Here's another one of those S shapes, right? Kind of got a point of extrema there and then a point of extrema there. So instead of putting one in the middle or anything, I'm going to start by trying to just put one up here. Maybe about there. Maybe, I think probably a little bit further back there maybe. And then with this is an area where dragging the segment doesn't really work particularly well, because you're not really increasing or decreasing the amount that that segment curves out or not. Instead, you're kind of curving in both directions, right, for this S shape. So if you, I gotta turn that up. If you try and drag it, it's just gonna go closer to one side or another, right? So instead, I'm gonna grab these handles, but again, I'm holding that shift key to lock those angles in place as I'm dragging these handles, but then kind of get a good balance going between them. Like that. All right. And then I'll come over here and grab a handle about there. Put him into place. Get one at the bottom. Very nice. All right. And I'll show you now another little trick that sometimes is helpful when doing some of these flourishes, and that is treating other non-closed loops like this as if they also were kind of like ellipse shapes as far as where I'm plotting my points, right? So this guy here, he kind of forms like most of an ellipse, right? This area here is definitely like half of an ellipse, or like a parabolic curve, if you remember your math class, right? So what I'll do is sometimes I will kind of treat that in that way, instead of like putting a point here, and then like trying to come over here. I'll go instead, and as I'm coming up here, I'll put a point like right there. And I'm just realizing while doing this on camera, it's funny the things you realize that you do that you don't normally realize once you're on camera, but I'll turn my head to align myself with the angle that I'm looking at, right? Couldn't possibly like rotate your artwork or anything to like fix your neck problems, but so then I'll put one right here as if it's like the top of that ellipse. And then another one kind of like over here, which would be sort of like the other side of that elliptical shape, that parabolic curve. Cool. And now that makes it a little less drastic than if I had like a point that's perfectly horizontal up here and then tried to like bring that curve all the way down to like this point here. Instead, I'm already coming from right here. So that makes it a little bit less of a strain on those kind of minimal point plots that I want to do, because you don't want a ton of points any more than you actually have. I did a lettering piece when I was like very early on in my career. That was Mo Bezier's Mo Problems. Big Biggie Smalls fan, of course. So that was my paraphrasing of his work. But I really do feel like it is true that the more points you've got, the more chances you have for a weird handle angle, or, you know, some kind of wonkiness where your curves aren't going to be as smooth as they could be, or at the very least, like when you go to try and fix something or shift things around or whatever, the more points you have, the harder it is to move things into place. If you've got like just only the points that you need and in like the most ideal places, then it makes moving things around and editing after the fact way, way easier. So, and there we go. There's our D, right? Pretty good. So come back in here. I'll do a command click off of there to break that stroke. And I'll start in on my I here. I'm going to try doing this kind of like bottom of the ellipse approach here. I feel like that's working out better for me today for some reason. Again, I just kind of like do what the vibe feels like in a given piece sometimes. Sometimes it just feels like one thing is working better than another some days. I don't know why. You guys feel like your tools tend to just behave better some days than others? I feel like that for sure. It just, sometimes I feel like I'm just the master of the universe and everything is bending to my will. And then other days, I feel like a total noob and nothing is behaving the way that I know that it absolutely should be. And that can be frustrating for sure. So for this tittle of this eye, I'm going to actually just draw a ellipse, kind of the same way I was doing for those shapes on the A's and the D's and the O, with kind of like this angled ellipse here. You can also just grab the ellipse tool and draw one and rotate it. I do that sometimes too, depending on my mood. And the way this one is going, I may do it this time too, because this is like feeling weird. I'm getting a lot of like snapping things going on with this other stroke here. So yeah, you know what? Let's go ahead and delete that sucker. And let's, I can use L, the L key, to grab an ellipse, my ellipse tool rather. And so that looks like about the right size and shape. And then I can rotate you. And then I can hold command to activate that direct selection tool and move him. All right, cool. Much better than the one that I was doing. But, right, you can see that these, let's see, the points of this guy are, at that true north, south, east, and west of what that was in its upright form, right? So like those don't shift around the corner when you rotate an ellipse. So these guys, are ideally at those locations. So that's kind of like the way that I like to think about these curved shapes a lot of time. Okay, moving on to the rest of this D here. I go back to my pen tool. Kind of start about here, and you can fudge with where these end as we start adding weight to those strokes. So let's see if I can get away with doing a point down here. I don't know. Sometimes with these longer strokes, it can be a little tricky or not work as well as you'd like, but I'm feeling like that's pretty good. Sometimes it might not line up exactly with your sketch, right? But like, I feel like that alignment is not necessarily like a wrong one, if that makes sense. So like, I'm kind of like going through the core of that stroke there, and it kind of dips out here, but I think in a lot of ways that might make this curve just better overall. So let me go ahead. Oops, I broke my stroke on accident there. So I'll just come back here, click and drag from that one to continue it. And I'll end him like about there. And command drag my segment here. So now I'm realizing that this isn't exactly as smooth as I'd like. So I'm going to fiddle with these a little bit. There we go. All right, that feels pretty good. All right, continue on with this A here. Okay, right down here, nice and wide. And come back up to my T here. Drag him into place. Drag him into place just a little bit. He's pretty close already. Maybe slide this guy over a smidge. Okay. All right. T. Boom. And after this one, I'm going to show you guys a little bit about weight so we don't run out of time. I know you want to see that rather than vectoring the rest of that today. I will show you more of the overall process instead of focusing on completing the piece itself. Grab my end stroke here, move him into place. Okay, pretty good. E. Again, I'm gonna kind of put a spot right there or so. Boom. Okay. Here. Again, not an ellipse shape, but a lot of the same principles apply as far as that ideal point placement, right? So, so this guy in my sketch, I've got these notches erased for, you know, kind of representing some highlight in this case, since it was going to be on those white backgrounds of the programs. So, but for this initial drawing, as with all these other spots that I didn't mention here, I'm just going to draw right through that, and we'll create some cutout shapes to remove those after the fact. But so I'm going to come up here. I'm thinking like about there is a good spot, because I'm going to, even though this is a filled shape up here, I'm going to actually draw it like a loop, and we'll fill it after the fact. There we go. And treat this guy like an ellipse down here as well. Drag him out there. Looks pretty good. Okay. Drag this one out a little too far on the bottom. Boom. Another point there. Gonna come in and fix that a smidge. Okay, and then since this guy, and broke my stroke. My stroke broke. Come up here. Just get a point at the top of that curve there. And then I'll just skip to the end of that curve there. Right on. So now we've got candidates, right? So let's go ahead and talk about adding some weight to these in these last few minutes that we have. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Some people will do their skeleton strokes like this, set them at the weight that they want their thinnest parts to be, and then build new additional shapes on top for the weighted areas. I like to do kind of like a combination of both. I'm a big advocate for the stroke width tool. And, you know, a lot of people feel like it doesn't quite do what you need to do. And there's some tricks to it. So because the stroke width tool, is that what it's called? It's been a while since I've done this. Just the width tool. Okay, great. Shift W is the which I think is like one of the smartest keyboard commands. Shift W, shift width. I don't know. That always made me happy. So I'm going to go ahead and select layer 2 because it's got all my strokes here. And I am going to bump these up to maybe even 3 points for what will be the thinnest areas, right? And so then what I do is I'll take this and you know, sometimes I'll group them. Sometimes I'll do separate layers. It just kind of, again, depends on my mood. So I've got those grouped. And what I want to actually do is I want to duplicate them. So I'll do Command C to copy, Command F to paste in front. So now I've got 2 of them, right? I'm going to lock the bottom one. Now, what that does is it keeps this bottom version locked where it is and at that consistent 3 points throughout. And then I'm going to work with the width tool on this top one. So you don't have to like have it selected actually to use the width tool, but I'm going to grab that, or you can do Shift W. And what you want to do first to make this really work, because the way that the Shift tool works is it tries to smooth out the distance and like the size between different points that you set, which on the thinner areas, it kind of overshoots that a little bit and gets too thin, and then things get a little wonky, whatever. So that is why I have a duplicate version under there that stays at that consistent 3-point stroke width. That way, no matter how it tries to do its smoothing and all that, it never dips below that 3 points that I want it at. So keeps those hairlines looking very consistent, and it's good. The other big tip for using the width tool is to go through and set the points at where your thin hairline areas start first. Instead of going in and adding thick parts and adding weight, you want to kind of constrain your thin parts first. So for instance, with this C, I've got some weight in here. I've got some weight over here on this swash, and then a little bit of weight right here, but then everywhere else is pretty thin, right? So it's got thin, 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 and it starts getting thick right in here. So I'm gonna go ahead and double click. My mouse is being weird. Double click. Nope. Okay, that's what's supposed to happen with double click. And we see right here, total width is 3 pixels, right? So I'm gonna hit okay. And then where it stops being thick, about there, double click. Okay, you can also hit enter there. And then it gets thick a little bit again. And then before it crosses back over, it gets thin again. I'm gonna lock it there. And then it starts getting thick again over here. So I'm gonna actually create another little 3 pixel point right there. And then one again right about there. Okay, so now with those in place, nothing has changed, right? But now when I come in here to where it should be the thickest, and I drag that guy out, when I released it, it went in a little bit, but now we can see it's thick here, but it doesn't just go and extend all throughout the stroke. It only goes to those places where I locked it in, right? And that is the key to doing this, is getting those constraints in first so that you can do that. Pretty cool. And I can click off of that. Let me go ahead and hide my stroke or my sketch and my guides so you can see that. And that is usually how I do this kind of lettering. And you know, it works out really, really well. And we can talk more about the ways that I extend that into, you know, terminals and what I do with it afterwards. I do some combining of those duplicated groups of strokes and stuff, and do some Pathfinder things to kind of finish that out, and then go through and clean up extra points that are created and stuff as necessary. But for the most part, that is really like the bulk of the hard part. After that, it's just kind of like finessing your strokes and stuff, and that stuff can be pretty easy. So next week, I'm going to come in here with some examples of some of the campus branding that I've been working on. In particular, Leander High School is redoing their lion. And so I've been doing all kinds of fun work with lion mascots, but also, like, again, trying to think about it in the context of what can apply to all of these other schools as I ultimately rebrand the ones that need help. And so it's been a really fun challenge, and one that has been tricky at times, but also, like, you know, just a real blast to work on. And I'd love to share some of that with you guys. So follow me on Instagram at Hamrick. I'm just there. I'm just that pretty much everywhere. And follow along as I kind of share maybe some teasers for next week. Yeah, I'll be back with some other Illustrator and also some sketch stuff of some new logos next week. So until then, enjoy all these other awesome Adobe Live shows. Everybody's killing it. And I'm glad to be a part of it. All right. You guys have a good week.